Chapter 22, The Road to Fort Benning, Part 2. Chapter 22, The Road to Fort Benning, Part 2. Pav. Carl Grimes. Carl balances on the fallen log, arms outstretched like a tightrope walker, while Sophia and Luis Morales cheer him on from below. The adults are taking another rest stop, something about checking routes and mechanical stuff that's boring to 12-year-old minds. I bet I can walk the whole thing without falling, Carl boasts, taking another careful step along the moss-covered trunk. Bet you can't, Sophia challenges with the devastating honesty of youth. Through the trees, Carl catches a glimpse of brown movement, a deer, he thinks, graceful and unafraid. Adventure calls with the irresistible voice that's led boys into trouble since the beginning of time. Come on, Carl whispers to his companions. Let's follow it. Pav. Lori Grimes. Lori discusses route options with Rick and Dale, spreading their collection of Georgia road maps across the RV's table. Fort Benning lies another 40 miles southeast, but the direct route passes through areas Glenn marked as problematic during his last scouting run. Back roads might be safer, Rick suggests. Slower, but less likely to encounter large groups. Or we could push straight through, Dale counters. Get there fast, deal with problems as they come. It's a strategic debate interrupted by maternal instinct when Lori realizes the background chatter of children's voices has gone silent. Where are the kids? Lori asks, scanning the immediate area with growing concern. Pav. Scott. Scott's system pings urgently just as Lori voices what he's already detected. Minors unaccounted for. Carl Grimes, location unknown. Sophia Peletier, location unknown. Danger assessment, moderate. Not again. First Sophia wanders off chasing butterflies, now Carl's leading an expedition into unknown terrain. Kids have a death wish in this world. They went into the woods, Scott announces, already moving toward the tree line. I heard them talking about following something, probably wildlife. Rick's face goes white as he realizes his son is missing. Again. Pav. Daryl Dixon. Daryl reads the children's trail with hunter's eyes, following broken twigs and disturbed leaves deeper into Georgia pine forest. 3 sets of small footprints leading downhill toward the sound of running water. Kids and water don't mix. Especially kids who think they're braver than they are. They're heading for the creek, Daryl reports to Scott and Rick. Moving fast, excited about something. The trail leads them along an increasingly steep slope where exposed roots and loose rocks make footing treacherous even for adults. For children distracted by adventure, it's an accident waiting to happen. Pav. Carl Grimes. Carl spots the deer again through a gap in the trees, beautiful, wild, free from the nightmare the world has become. He moves closer, gesturing for Sophia and Luis to follow, when the ground gives way beneath his feet. The slope is steeper than it looks, slick with autumn leaves and hidden moisture. Carl tumbles downward, grabbing frantically for handholds that crumble in his grasp, until his leg catches against an exposed root with a sound like breaking wood. Pain explodes through his left leg as he comes to rest at the bottom of a 10-foot ravine. Above him, Sophia screams his name while Luis runs for help. Pav. Scott. Scott hears Carl's scream echo through the forest and breaks into a sprint, crashing through underbrush with system-enhanced speed and sure footing. Medical emergency detected. Carl Grimes. Injured, fracture probable. Immediate intervention required. Medical protocols activated. He reaches the ravine's edge to find Carl conscious but pale, his left leg bent at an angle that makes Scott's EMT training scream warnings. Compound fracture. Possible arterial damage, shock setting in. Carl. Don't move, Scott shouts, rappelling down the slope with controlled urgency. I'm coming down to help. Pav. Rick Grimes. Rick's world narrows to his son's pain-filled face at the bottom of the ravine, everything else becoming background noise. Carl's leg is obviously broken, bone protruding through torn pants, blood pooling beneath the injury. Not Carl. Not my boy. We can't lose him. I can't lose him. How bad? Rick calls down to Scott, who's already kneeling beside Carl with medical supplies from his pack. Compound fracture, Scott reports with clinical calm. But he's conscious, responsive, no signs of head trauma. I can stabilize him, but we need proper medical care soon. Pav. Scott. Scott's enhanced first aid abilities guide his hands through emergency triage while his system provides continuous analysis of Carl's condition. Patient status. Stable but serious. Fracture. Compound, mid-tibia. Blood loss, moderate. Shock indicators, present. Treatment priority, stabilization, immobilization, transport. Carl, I need you to stay very still while I work on your leg, Scott says, his voice carrying the calm authority that's kept countless patients stable during transport. You're going to be okay, but this is going to hurt a bit. Carl nods bravely, tears streaming down his face but trying not to cry in front of the adults. Is it bad? It's broken, but bones heal, Scott says, applying pressure to control bleeding while preparing splinting materials. Lots of people break bones and come back stronger. Pav. Daryl Dixon. Daryl coordinates the extraction with military efficiency, rigging rope systems and organizing supplies while Scott works medical magic in the ravine. The hunter's seen plenty of field medicine, hunting accidents, falls, the routine violence of country life, but Scott's skill level impresses him. Boy knows his business, steady hands, clear thinking, no panic. Kid's lucky it was Scott who found him. Need anything else down there? Daryl calls. Transport, Scott replies, securing Carl's leg in an improvised splint. And we need to find proper medical care fast. This is beyond field treatment. Pav. Carl Grimes. The pain comes in waves, stealing Carl's breath and making his vision blur around the edges. But Scott's presence is steady, reassuring, the kind of calm competence that makes impossible situations feel manageable. Am I going to lose my leg? Carl asks quietly, voicing the fear that's bigger than pain. No, Scott says with absolute certainty. This is fixable, but we need to get you to someone with the right equipment, X-rays, surgical tools, proper antibiotics. Carl nods, trusting Scott's judgment the way children trust adults who've proven themselves reliable under pressure. Pav. Lori Grimes. Lori watches her husband descend into the ravine to help carry Carl out, her heart hammering against her ribs with maternal terror. Shane used to talk about worst-case scenarios, about losing people to the stupid accidents that kill more survivors than walkers ever do. Broken leg, not a bite, not an infection, just a broken leg that can be fixed if we find the right help. There's a farm nearby, Scott calls up as they prepare Carl for transport. Saw a mailbox about a mile back, Green Family Farm. If they're still there, they might have medical supplies. Pav. Scott. Scott's system confirms what he already knows from canonical memory, Herschel Green's veterinary practice, medical supplies, surgical capability. But approaching the farm under these circumstances changes everything about their first contact. Inhabited structure. 0.8 km northeast. Medical supplies. Probable. Residents. 7 humans detected. Threat assessment. Neutral. Herschel's there, just like in canon. But without Sophia lost in the woods, without the search that led to Carl getting shot, everything about this encounter is different. They carry Carl through the forest on an improvised stretcher, taking turns bearing his weight while maintaining careful movement to avoid aggravating his injuries. The boy's brave, making jokes between waves of pain, but his face grows paler with each passing minute. Pav. Herschel Green. Herschel emerges from his farmhouse at the sound of approaching voices, shotgun in hand but lowered when he recognizes the nature of their emergency. An injured child, adult voices calling for medical help, the kind of crisis that transcends suspicion of strangers. A boy, hurt badly from the look of it. These people aren't raiders or thieves, they're parents seeking help for their child. What happened? Herschel asks, setting aside his weapon as they approach with Carl on the stretcher. Fall into a ravine, Scott explains, matching pace with the veterinarian as they head toward the house. Compound fracture, left tibia. I've stabilized him, but he needs surgical attention. Herschel evaluates Scott during their brief exchange, noting the medical terminology and professional bearing. Another healthcare worker, possibly, someone who understands the situation's severity. Pav. Maggie Green. Maggie watches from the porch as strangers carry an injured child toward their home, her father already shifting into medical mode despite his usual caution about outsiders. The group looks exhausted, desperate, but not dangerous, families with children, elderly members, the composition of refugees rather than raiders. One young Asian man among them catches her attention with his nervous energy and obvious competence as he helps coordinate the medical response. Cute, in a lost puppy kind of way. Well, this should be interesting. Pav. Herschel Green. Inside the farmhouse, Herschel and Scott work together with seamless coordination. The stranger's medical knowledge is impressive, proper terminology, sterile technique, understanding of shock protocols. Definitely professional training. Your EMT, Herschel asks while preparing surgical instruments. 5 years, Atlanta Fire Department, Scott confirms, monitoring Carl's vitals. This is beyond my scope, but I can assist. They set Carl's leg with veterinary precision adapted for human anatomy, Scott providing expert assistance while Rick and Lori hover anxiously nearby. The boy is stable, sedated, leg properly aligned and casted. He'll need antibiotics, pain management, and 6 weeks of limited mobility, Herschel explains to Rick. But he should heal completely. Pav. Rick Grimes. Relief floods through Rick as Herschel delivers the prognosis. Carl will be okay, complete recovery expected, no permanent damage. The nightmare scenario of losing his son fades into manageable reality. Thank you, Rick says, gripping Herschel's hand with genuine gratitude. We can pay. No payment necessary, Herschel interrupts gently. I took an oath to do no harm. That applies to all God's creatures. Rick studies their host, elderly veterinarian, kind eyes, the bearing of someone who's maintained moral clarity despite the world's collapse. These are good people, the kind they need to ally with. We're travelers, heading to Fort Benning, Rick explains. Lost our permanent shelter recently. If Carl could rest here during recovery. Herschel nods understanding. You're welcome to stay until the boy's mobile. We have space, and extra hands are always useful on a farm. Pav. Scott. That evening, both communities share dinner in the green farmhouse, awkward but hopeful first contact between groups learning to coexist. Scott observes family dynamics while keeping his foreknowledge carefully hidden. Beth's quiet musical talent, Maggie's sharp intelligence, Herschel's measured wisdom. The same people from canon, but encountered under different circumstances that might change everything about their relationships. His system detects the barn's secret, multiple human signatures with Walker-like vital readings, but Scott stays silent. Without Sophia lost in the desperate search, the barn revelation will unfold differently. They're keeping infected family members, just like in canon. But this time we can address it calmly, rationally, without the emotional pressure of a missing child. Maybe we can find a better solution. Glenn can't stop staring at Maggie, who notices his attention with amused tolerance. That relationship might develop along canonical lines despite the changed circumstances. You seem to know what you're doing, Herschel observes quietly to Scott. Medical field. Emergency medicine, Scott confirms. Seen my share of trauma cases. Herschel nods slowly, recognizing kindred professional spirit. Good to have someone with proper training. This world's hard on people who lack medical knowledge. The conversation carries weight beyond its words, professional respect, shared understanding of medical ethics, recognition that Scott might be someone Herschel can work with rather than merely tolerate. As night falls over the green farm, Scott lies in an unfamiliar bed and processes the day's changes. Carl's injury replaced Sophia's disappearance as the catalyst for finding the farm. Canon events continue, but along altered paths that might lead anywhere. For now, Carl heals safely while their communities begin the delicate process of learning whether they can coexist. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight offers the precious gift of relative safety and hope for successful cooperation. Outside, George's night sounds provide peaceful backdrop to recovery and new beginnings. The story continues, but along roads Scott helped choose rather than simply walked. Chapter 23, Two Communities. Chapter 23, Two Communities. Pav. Herschel Green. Herschel sets down his coffee and studies the young man across his breakfast table, Scott, the EMT who helped save Carl's leg with surgical precision that impressed even a veterinarian. There's something about Scott's manner that suggests depths beneath the surface, medical knowledge that goes beyond emergency training. The infection, Herschel begins carefully, in your professional opinion, is it truly irreversible? Scott pauses with his fork halfway to his mouth, considering the question with the gravity it deserves. Around the table, Rick's people tense slightly, they know where this conversation leads. What do you think it is? Scott asks gently, deflecting while gathering information. A disease, perhaps viral, maybe bacterial. Something that affects the brain, causes aggressive behavior, but Herschel's voice carries desperate hope. Diseases can be treated, cured. Pav. Rick Grimes. Rick's jaw tightens as he recognizes the dangerous territory they're entering. He's seen too much death, too much reality, to indulge in comforting fantasies about the infected being, sick people, who might recover. With respect, Rick says carefully, those things out there aren't sick. They're dead, walking corpses that want to eat us. Herschel's expression hardens. That's a very convenient way to justify killing them without guilt. The accusation hangs in the morning air like smoke, dividing the table into camps, Rick's people nodding agreement with their leader, Herschel's family looking uncomfortable but loyal. Pav. Scott. Scott feels the tension escalate and quickly intervenes, his diplomatic instincts honed by months of managing group dynamics. This is the philosophical divide that nearly destroyed both groups in canon. Herschel's hope versus Rick's pragmatism. I need to bridge this without destroying either perspective. Both viewpoints have merit, Scott says quietly. Herschel, your hope for humanity is admirable, we need people who refuse to give up on the possibility of healing. But Rick's right about the immediate threat. Whatever these people were, their higher brain functions are gone. They respond only to hunger and movement. Herschel's eyes flash with hurt. You're a medical professional, surely you understand the possibility of recovery. I understand brain death, Scott continues gently. And I understand hope. Maybe someday someone with advanced scientific resources will find a cure, a treatment, something. But until then, we protect the living by acknowledging what the infected have become. Pav. Maggie Green. Maggie watches the philosophical debate with growing discomfort, knowing it strikes at the heart of her father's worldview. Daddy's been keeping infected family members in the barn, caring for them like patients rather than putting them down like rabid animals. She catches Glenn's eye across the table, sweet, nervous Glenn who volunteered to help with today's supply run to town with transparent eagerness to spend time with her. His crush is adorable, obvious, and surprisingly welcome after months of isolation. At least some good can come from these two groups meeting, even if Daddy and Rick can't agree about the dead. More coffee anyone, Maggie offers, standing to diffuse the tension with domestic routine. Pav. Glenn Ree. Glenn accepts the coffee refill with a grateful smile, noting how Maggie's hand lingers just a moment longer than necessary when their fingers brush. She's beautiful, green eyes, confident manner, the kind of woman who would never have noticed him in the old world. But this isn't the old world, and Glenn's proven himself capable of things he never imagined possible, navigating walker-infested cities, coordinating supply runs, earning the respect of people like Daryl and Scott. I could use a guide for the pharmacy run, Glenn offers hopefully. Someone who knows the local area. Maggie's smile suggests she sees right through his transparent excuse. I suppose I could spare the time. Dale chuckles from across the table. Young love blooms even in the apocalypse. Pav. Andrea. Andrea watches the interactions with amused fondness while her rifle waits cleaned and ready beside her plate. The shooting lessons with Scott have become the highlight of her days, partly for the skill development, mostly for the intimacy of shared focus and gentle instruction. He's patient, encouraging, completely different from Shane's aggressive training methods. Scott treats me like an equal who can learn, not a liability to be managed. Think we could use the south pasture for target practice today? Andrea asks Herschel. Continue the lessons. Herschel nods distractedly, still processing Scott's gentle challenge to his beliefs about the infected. Of course, just mind the livestock. Scott's eyes meet Andreas with promise of shared time away from group tensions. Something warm and electric passes between them, the kind of connection that transcends words. Pav. Scott. Later that morning, Scott sets up targets in the pasture while Andrea loads her rifle with practiced efficiency. Her progress has been remarkable, natural talent enhanced by dedicated practice and quality instruction. Stance, Scott murmurs, positioning himself behind her to adjust her grip and shoulder alignment. Remember, the rifle is an extension of your body, not a separate tool. Andreas back presses against his chest as he guides her aim, both of them acutely aware of the physical contact that's become increasingly charged with romantic tension. Like this? Andrea asks, though her technique is already perfect. Exactly like that. The first shot takes the target dead center. The second punches through the same hole. By the fifth consecutive bullseye, Andrea lowers the rifle and turns in the circle of Scott's arms. I think I'm getting the hang of it, she says quietly, green eyes bright with accomplishment and something deeper. Pav. Andrea. The kiss is inevitable, natural as breathing after weeks of growing attraction and shared danger. Andrea drops the rifle and pulls Scott closer, tasting morning coffee and the promise of life continuing despite everything trying to end it. This is what I've been missing. Not just physical contact, but connection with someone who sees me as strong, capable, worth protecting and worth teaching. When they break apart, both breathing hard, Scott's expression carries surprise and wonder like he can't quite believe this is happening. Andrea, don't you dare apologize, she warns, stepping back reluctantly. Don't you dare say this is complicated or dangerous or whatever excuse men use when they're scared of genuine feeling. Scott's smile is soft, genuine. I was going to say that was worth waiting for. Pav. Carol Pelletier. Carol hangs laundry and observes the romantic tension between Andrea and Scott with maternal satisfaction. Both of them deserve happiness, connection, the reminder that life offers more than just survival and fear. Sophia plays nearby with Carl, whose leg is healing rapidly thanks to Scott and Herschel's combined care. The children adapt to change with resilience that amazes and heartbreaks her, making friends, finding joy, refusing to let the world's darkness consume their capacity for laughter. Scott saved my daughter twice now. First from that walker in the woods, then from the trauma of watching other children get hurt. We owe him more than I can ever repay. Mama, Sophia calls. Carl says his dad might let us stay here longer. Is that true? Carol smiles, genuinely hopeful for the first time in months. Maybe, baby, we'll see what the grown-ups decide. Pav. Daryl Dixon. Daryl maintains perimeter security while keeping one eye on the farm's domestic activities. Glenn's making moon eyes at Maggie, Andrea's teaching herself to shoot better than most men, and everyone's settling into routines that feel dangerously close to normal life. Getting comfortable. That's when people die, when they start thinking they're safe. But even Daryl has to admit the arrangement has benefits. Consistent food, medical care for injuries, defensive positions that don't require constant vigilance. Maybe comfort isn't always weakness. Through the trees, he spots movement, not walkers, just deer grazing in the distance. For a moment, Daryl allows himself to imagine hunting for sport rather than survival, tracking game for the joy of the skill rather than desperate hunger. Pav. Dale Horvath. Dale works on the RV's engine while listening to the sounds of two communities learning to coexist. Children's laughter, adult conversation, the normal rhythms of life that seemed lost forever when the world ended. This is what we're fighting to preserve. Not just survival, but the possibility of rebuilding something worth surviving for. Scott appears with tools and mechanical knowledge that complements Dale's experience, working together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. The young man's competence continues to impress: medical skills, tactical knowledge, mechanical aptitude, and now diplomatic wisdom that bridges competing worldviews. You've got a gift for bringing people together, Dale observes as they wrestle with a stubborn bolt. Making enemies into allies. Scott's smile is tired but genuine. Just trying to find common ground. We're all human, all trying to protect the people we love. Pav. Rick Grimes. That evening, Rick finds Herschel on the farmhouse porch, both men processing the day's philosophical conversation with the weight of leadership responsibility. I don't want to impose, Rick begins carefully. But Carl's recovery is ahead of schedule. If we could stay a bit longer, help with farm work, contribute to the community. Herschel rocks slowly in his chair, considering the proposal with the measured thought of someone who's seen enough of the world to recognize genuine offers of partnership. Your people are respectful, hardworking. And that young man Scott, he's got wisdom beyond his years. He does, Rick agrees. Good judge of character, good mediator. Helps people find solutions instead of just pointing out problems. Herschel nods slowly. Extended stay in exchange for labor and protection. Fair trade. The agreement feels monumental despite its simplicity, two groups choosing cooperation over suspicion, shared strength over isolated vulnerability. Pav. Scott. Later that night, Scott and Andrea make love in the barn's hayloft, both desperate for connection and affirmation of life amid constant reminders of mortality. Afterward, they lie entwined in comfortable silence, her head on his chest while he traces patterns on her bare shoulder. When will you trust me with your secrets? Andrea asks quietly, not accusatory but curious. Scott's hand stills on her skin. She knows he's hiding something significant, sees through his carefully constructed explanations to the deeper mysteries beneath. I love her, but how do I explain transmigration, system interfaces, knowledge of future events? How do I tell her I'm from another world where her life was a TV show? Some secrets are too dangerous to share, Scott says finally. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowledge can be a burden that changes everything. Andrea lifts her head to meet his eyes. I can carry burdens. I've carried plenty already. I know, and maybe someday. Scott kisses her forehead gently. For now, is it enough to know that everything I do is to protect the people I care about? That includes you, especially you. Andrea settles back against his chest, apparently satisfied with partial truth wrapped in genuine emotion. Outside, George's night sounds provide peaceful backdrop to tentative happiness and growing hope. Two communities have found common ground, love blooms despite apocalyptic circumstances, and for the first time in months, tomorrow feels like something worth anticipating rather than just another day to survive. Carl sleeps safely with his leg healing properly, Sophia plays without fear of wandering into danger, and adults dare to dream of stability lasting longer than a few desperate weeks. But in the barn below, Scott knows, infected family members wait in chains, Herschel's secret that will soon force another crisis requiring diplomatic solutions rather than violent ones. For now, though, peace reigns over the green farm, and Scott allows himself to hope they can maintain it through whatever storms lie ahead. Chapter 24, The Barn's Secret. Chapter 24, The Barn's Secret. Pav. Dale Horvath. The RV needs new brake pads, and Dale's makeshift repair station near the barn provides shade and access to tools. He's worked on vehicles his entire adult life, finding zen in the systematic diagnosis and repair of mechanical problems that have clear solutions. Unlike human problems, which resist simple fixes, the sound carries through the barn's weathered boards, a low moaning that makes Dale's blood freeze in his veins. He knows that sound. Everyone alive knows that sound. Walkers. Inside the barn. How many? How long have they been there? Dale approaches the barn doors with trembling hands, knowing he shouldn't look but unable to resist the awful certainty drawing him forward. The doors are secured with a chain and padlock, but gaps between the boards offer glimpses into shadow and horror. At least a dozen pairs of eyes stare back at him through the darkness, milky, unfocused, hungry. Walkers, restrained but alive, moaning with patient hunger while something keeps them captive instead of putting them down. Pav. Scott. Scott finds Dale 20 minutes later, sitting on an upturned crate with his face in his hands and the barn doors firmly closed behind him. The old man's expression tells the story before words become necessary. You looked inside, Scott says quietly, settling beside Dale. Dear God in heaven, Dale whispers. How many? 12, maybe 15. Herschel's family members and neighbors. Scott's voice carries no surprise, only resigned confirmation of inevitable discovery. Dale's head snaps up. You knew. Careful. Can't reveal foreknowledge, but I can't lie to Dale either. He deserves honesty, even if it's incomplete. I suspected, Scott admits carefully. Herschel's beliefs about the infected being sick rather than dead, his refusal to discuss certain topics. The pieces suggested he might be keeping infected family somewhere. Dale stares at the barn with horror and heartbreak warring on his weathered features. That man's wife, his neighbors, he's keeping them like patients in a hospital ward. We need to handle this carefully, Scott says firmly. No violence, no confrontations. Herschel's not evil, he's grieving and clinging to hope. We approach this with diplomacy. Pav. Rick Grimes. The emergency meeting takes place in Dale's RV, away from Herschel's family and the children who don't need to hear adult conversations about life and death. Rick's inner circle gathers, Glenn, Daryl, Andrea, T-Dog, while Dale explains his discovery with shaking voice. Walkers, Rick says flatly when Dale finishes. He's keeping walkers in the barn while we sleep 50 yards away. His family, Scott corrects gently. His wife, stepson, neighbors. People he loved who got infected. He can't let them go. Daryl spits tobacco juice and speaks with characteristic bluntness. Don't matter who they were. They're dead things now, need putting down. Agreed, Rick says, but Scott raises a hand for patience. Pav. Glenn feels betrayed in ways he can't fully articulate. Maggie knew about the barn, knew they were sleeping near a dozen walkers, and never said a word. The woman he's falling in love with kept a secret that could have gotten them all killed. She chose her family over us, over me. Can I blame her for that? Would I have done differently? Maggie knows, Glenn says quietly. The whole family knows. They've been keeping this secret since we arrived. Which makes them dangerous, Rick concludes grimly. People who lie about walker proximity can't be trusted with our safety. Or, Scott counters firmly, they're people grieving family members and clinging to hope for recovery. We handle this with understanding, not accusations. Pav. Daryl Dixon. Daryl's seen enough death to know the difference between grief and delusion. Dead is dead, and keeping walkers around the living is suicide with extra steps. You want understanding? Daryl demands. Those things get loose, they'll kill every child in this camp. Including Carl and Sophia. That understanding enough for you? Scott meets his gaze steadily. Which is why we address it through conversation instead of violence. Prove to Herschel that his family members are gone, that what remains isn't worth saving. Do it with respect for his pain. And if he won't listen? Rick asks. Then we handle it ourselves, Scott acknowledges. But we try diplomacy first. Pav. Scott. Scott approaches the barn an hour later, knowing Herschel's likely inside tending to the walkers like patients in a hospital ward. The sound of shuffling feet and low moaning carries through the weathered boards, punctuated by Herschel's voice speaking gentle words to creatures that can't understand them. He's talking to his wife's walker, probably. Treating her like she's sick instead of dead. This is going to break his heart, but it has to be done. Scott opens the barn doors to find exactly what he expected, Herschel moving between restrained walkers with water and what might have been medicine, talking to them like they're lucid patients rather than animated corpses. Herschel. The veterinarian turns, his face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and defensive anger. You have no right to be here. I'm an EMT, Scott says gently, stepping into the barn despite the danger. I know death, Herschel. I've seen brain death, clinical death, biological death. I understand what you're hoping for. Pav. Herschel Green. Herschel feels his carefully constructed world of hope and denial cracking under Scott's calm, professional assessment. The EMT approaches the restrained walkers with clinical detachment, studying them like specimens rather than patients. He's going to tell me they're dead. Gone. That everything I've done to care for them has been delusion and waste. These are my wife and stepson, Herschel says desperately. Our neighbors, people we've known for decades. They're sick, not dead. Scott kneels beside the walker that was once Annette Green, studying her milky eyes and slack features with medical precision. Look at her pupils, Scott says quietly. Fixed and dilated. No response to light, no tracking movement. These are signs of brain death, Herschel. Her higher brain functions are gone. But she moves, responds to stimuli. Brain stem reflexes, automatic responses that persist even after cognitive death. Scott's voice carries compassion wrapped in clinical truth. I'm sorry, but your wife is gone. What remains is her body, animated by basic neural activity. Pav. Andrea. Andrea watches from the barn's entrance as Scott performs the most difficult diagnosis of his career, explaining death to a man who refuses to accept it. Her heart aches for both of them, Scott bearing the burden of destroying hope, Herschel facing the loss of everything he's clung to for survival. This is why I love him. Not just his strength or knowledge, but his compassion. He's breaking this man's world with gentle honesty instead of brutal confrontation. Behind her, Rick and Daryl wait with weapons ready, prepared for violence if Herschel's denial turns dangerous. But Scott's approach bypasses the need for force, using medical authority to cut through emotional resistance. Pav. Herschel Green. The truth hits Herschel like cold water, washing away months of comforting self-deception. Annette, his wife, his partner, his reason for hope, stares through him with empty eyes that hold no recognition, no love, no humanity. She's gone, has been gone since the bite, since the fever, since the moment her heart stopped beating and something else started moving her body. I wanted to believe, Herschel whispers, tears streaming down his weathered face. I needed to believe recovery was possible. It's not wrong to hope, Scott says gently. But hope that prevents you from living is paralysis, not faith. Your wife wouldn't want you to die caring for her corpse. The words are brutal and kind simultaneously, offering truth wrapped in understanding rather than judgment. Pav. Rick Grimes. Rick watches the confrontation reach its emotional climax as Herschel's worldview crumbles under medical reality. The old man's grief is palpable, devastating, the sound of hope dying in real time. But better broken hope than dead children when the walkers inevitably break free. What do you want to do? Rick asks Herschel quietly. Herschel stares at his wife's walker for a long moment, processing loss that goes beyond simple death into the realm of violated memory and corrupted love. One test, Herschel says finally. Let me try to reach her. If she doesn't respond, if there's truly nothing left. He swallows hard. Then we do what needs doing. Pav. Scott. Scott coordinates the controlled experiment with the precision of a medical procedure. Herschel's wife is secured and isolated, protective barriers in place, multiple people ready to intervene if the test goes wrong. This has to be definitive. If Herschel sees any ambiguity, he'll cling to false hope and we'll be back where we started. Herschel approaches his wife's walker with trembling hands, speaking her name with desperate love while the creature shows no recognition, no response beyond hunger for his living flesh. Annette, honey, it's Herschel. Look at me, sweetheart. Please. The walker lunges with mechanical precision, teeth snapping inches from Herschel's throat before the restraints stop her advance. No recognition, no humanity, just hunger and the instinct to feed. Pav. Herschel Green. Herschel's heart breaks completely as his wife, the woman he loved, married, built a life with, tries to eat him with the same casual hunger she'd show for any piece of meat. She's gone, truly, finally, completely gone. I understand now, Herschel says quietly, stepping back from the creature wearing his wife's face. She's not there anymore. Scott nods with infinite compassion. I'm sorry for your loss. All of your losses. The barn clearing happens at dawn, each walker put down cleanly while Herschel says names and offers prayers. Maggie holds Beth as she sobs silently, while Glenn provides gentle comfort with hands that understand grief. It's painful but peaceful, a funeral rather than a massacre, honoring the dead by freeing them from animated imprisonment. Pav. Maggie Green. Maggie watches her father's hope die with each gunshot, but also sees him begin to heal from the impossible weight he's been carrying. Caring for animated corpses wasn't love, it was torture, for him and for what remained of them. Scott did this right, gently, respectfully, but definitively. No violence, no trauma, just truth delivered with compassion. Glenn stands beside her throughout the ordeal, offering support without trying to fix what can't be repaired. His presence is steady, comforting, exactly what she needs as her family's careful delusions crumble into manageable reality. Pav. Dale Horvath. Dale watches the barn clearing from a respectful distance, noting how Scott manages to honor both the living and the dead throughout the process. No unnecessary violence, no traumatic confrontations, just grief acknowledged and dealt with appropriately. This is leadership, not commanding through strength, but guiding through wisdom, helping people reach difficult truths without destroying them in the process. The young man continues to impress with his ability to find diplomatic solutions to problems that seem to demand violence. Perhaps there's hope for humanity after all, if enough people choose compassion over expedience. As the last walker falls silent, Herschel kneels beside what was once his wife and whispers a final goodbye. The barn stands empty now, ready to serve its proper function as storage and shelter rather than a monument to denial. Two communities have survived another crisis through understanding rather than conflict, and the Green Farm settles into a new phase of cooperation built on shared truth rather than comfortable lies. The dead rest properly buried, the living continue building tomorrow, and hope takes on more realistic dimensions that might actually prove sustainable in an impossible world. Chapter 25. Merle's Return. Chapter 25. Merle's Return. Pav. Daryl Dixon. The watch alarm cuts through midnight silence like a blade, jolting Daryl from restless sleep. He rolls from his bedroll with crossbow in hand, scanning the farm's perimeter for whatever threat triggered their early warning system. A figure stands at the gate, too tall for a walker, moving with human purpose rather than mindless shuffle. Daryl's heart stops as moonlight reveals familiar features scarred by weeks in the wilderness. Merle. The name escapes Daryl's throat as a whispered prayer answered. His brother stands 20 yards away, leaner than before, marked by new scars and old pain, but unmistakably alive. Hey there, baby brother. Merle's voice carries exhaustion and something else, a gravity that wasn't there before Atlanta, like the weeks alone carved away everything unnecessary and left only essential truth. Pav. Scott. Scott emerges from the farmhouse with Rick and Herschel, all three men armed and alert as Daryl's shout brings the community to full wakefulness. His system immediately scans the returned survivor. Merle Dixon identified, health. Stable, multiple healed injuries. Threat assessment. Neutral. Concealing information. Loyalty. Uncertain. He's different, calmer, more focused. Whatever happened during his time away changed him fundamentally. Daryl reaches his brother first, embracing him with desperate relief while Merle pats his back with uncharacteristic gentleness. The reunion is wordless, profound, two broken pieces of the same fractured family finally whole again. Thought you were dead, Daryl mutters against Merle's shoulder. Takes more than the apocalypse to kill a Dixon, Merle replies, but his voice lacks the usual bravado, replaced by quiet certainty. Pav. Rick Grimes. Rick approaches with cautious optimism, noting immediate changes in Merle's demeanor. Gone is the aggressive hostility that marked their previous interactions, replaced by measured assessment and professional alertness. Merle, Rick nods acknowledgement. Glad to see you made it. Sheriff, Merle returns the greeting with surprising respect. Heard you folks found yourselves a nice setup here. Herschel's been generous with his hospitality. You're welcome to stay, long as you can follow the rules. Merle's smile is tired but genuine. Appreciate that, but I ain't the staying type. Got business needs tending to. The cryptic response triggers Rick's cop instincts, but Merle's non-threatening posture suggests whatever business he's conducting doesn't involve immediate danger to the farm. Pav, Herschel Green. Herschel studies the returned survivor with veterinarian's eyes, noting signs of sustained hardship and recent healing. Multiple scars, lean muscle, the bearing of someone who's survived extended isolation through competence rather than luck. This man's been through trials that would break lesser people. But he's not broken, he's refined, distilled to essential elements. You're hurt, Herschel observes, noting the way Merle favors his left side. Nothing that won't heal, Merle deflects. Doc, I appreciate the concern, but I've had worse and lived through it. The matter-of-fact response carries weight of experience that impresses Herschel despite his reservations about Merle's past behavior. Survival has taught the man lessons about himself he might not have learned any other way. Pav, Andrea. Andrea watches the reunion from the farmhouse porch, noting how Scott observes Merle with unusual intensity. There's recognition in Scott's expression that goes beyond their shared history in Atlanta, like he's seeing something others miss. Scott knows something about Merle's return. His body language suggests he's not entirely surprised, maybe even expected this. She approaches Scott quietly. Everything all right? Just processing, Scott replies, but his attention remains fixed on Merle's every gesture and word. People change when they're alone too long. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. Pav, Scott. Later that morning, Scott joins the debriefing as Merle shares carefully edited accounts of his weeks in the wilderness. The older Dixon speaks with measured precision, each word chosen for maximum impact and minimum revelation. Survived alone mostly, Merle explains to the gathered adults. Kept moving, avoided large groups, learned the lay of the land. There's threats out there you folks should know about. Scott's system continues analyzing Merle's statements, noting micro-expressions and voice patterns that suggest selective truth-telling. Stress indicators, minimal. Deception markers, present but controlled. Subject withholding significant information. He's not lying exactly, but he's definitely not telling the whole truth. What did he really do during those weeks? And why does he keep looking at me like that? What kind of threats? Rick asks, leaning forward with professional interest. Merle's expression grows dark. Group calling themselves the Saviors. Operating out of multiple outposts, demanding tribute from settlements. Led by someone calls himself Negan. Scott's blood turns to ice at the familiar names. In canon, the Saviors didn't appear until much later. Their early arrival suggests his changes to the timeline are creating unexpected acceleration of future threats. Pav, Daryl Dixon. Daryl studies his brother's face as Merle describes the Saviors, noting controlled anger beneath measured reporting. Something about this group has gotten under Merle's skin in ways that simple territorial disputes wouldn't explain. You run into them personal like? Daryl asks. Merle's pause lasts half a second too long. Observed from distance. Smart to avoid contact with organized raiders. The evasion is subtle but present, suggesting Merle's knowledge of the Saviors comes from closer contact than he's admitting. Daryl files that information away for private conversation later. Pav, Glenn Rhee. Glenn maps Merle's reported Savior locations on their collection of regional charts, noting the strategic positioning around major supply routes and defensible communities. The placement suggests military-level tactical thinking. They're setting up a tributary system, Glenn realizes. Control the roads, demand payment for passage and protection. Classic extortion network. Smart, Merle acknowledges grimly. Well-organized, well-armed, disciplined. Not just raiders, they're building an empire. The assessment sends chills through the gathered group. Random bandit attacks they can handle, but organized military opposition requires entirely different defensive strategies. Pav, Carol Pelletier. That evening, Carol watches Merle interact with the children during dinner, noting unprecedented gentleness in his approach. He speaks quietly to Carl about survival techniques, shows Sophia how to identify edible plants, treats them like people rather than nuisances. Prison changes people. Isolation changes people. Maybe losing everything forced Merle to discover parts of himself he never knew existed. The transformation isn't complete. She still sees flashes of the old Merle's aggressive edges, but something fundamental has shifted in his relationship with vulnerability, both his own and others. Pav. Scott. Near midnight, Scott keeps watch on the farm's perimeter when Merle approaches with the silent movement of someone who's learned stealth through necessity. The older man settles beside Scott without invitation, studying the night sky with calculated patience. Nice setup y'all got here, Merle observes casually. Safe, sustainable, good people. Make a man think about settling down. But you won't, Scott states rather than asks. Merle's smile is knowing. Nah, got business to attend to. Debts to pay. They sit in comfortable silence for several minutes before Merle drops his bombshell. You got the system too, don't you? Pav. Scott. Scott's world tilts as Merle's words hit him like ice water. His carefully maintained secret, the foundation of his survival advantage, spoken aloud by the last person he'd expect to understand. How could he possibly know? I've been so careful. I don't know what you're talking about, Scott says carefully, but Merle's laugh is rich with understanding. Course you do. Them supply caches you found in Atlanta. Perfect timing, perfect locations, stuff nobody else would think to look for. That ain't luck, brother. That's information. Scott's mind races through possibilities, surveillance, coincidence, lucky guesses, but Merle continues with devastating accuracy. I ain't got what you got, but I recognize the signs. Unnatural awareness, impossible timing, knowledge that comes from somewhere else. Your secret's safe, Merle raises his hands peacefully. You saved my ass when you could have let me die. Figure I owe you some loyalty for that. Pav. Merle Dixon. Merle watches Scott process the revelation, noting the careful control that prevents panic despite the shock. Good survival instincts, even when blindsided. Boy's been carrying that secret alone, thinking nobody would understand. But I've seen enough impossible shit in my life to know when someone's operating with advantages they can't explain. Found your cache sites, Merle explains quietly. Followed the patterns, recognized the placement. Military precision, but not military thinking. Something else entirely. Took me weeks to figure out you were leaving them for yourself to discover later. Scott's expression cycles through denial, calculation, and finally resigned acceptance. What do you want? Scott asks quietly. To help, Merle says simply. You're protecting my brother, keeping these people alive, using whatever advantages you got for good instead of exploitation. That's rare. Pav. Scott. Scott stares at Merle Dixon, racist, violent, unstable Merle Dixon, offering alliance and protection of his deepest secret. The irony is staggering, but the sincerity in Merle's voice suggests genuine commitment. He doesn't know about the transmigration or the system interface. He thinks I have some kind of supernatural awareness or military intelligence. Close enough to the truth to be dangerous, but not the complete picture. Why? Scott asks. Why help me? Because you helped me when you didn't have to. Because you protect people instead of using them. And because whatever's coming, these saviors, Negan, the shit I seen out there, you're gonna need eyes and ears beyond these walls. The practical offer makes sense despite its impossible source. Merle's proven survival skills, knowledge of the region, and willingness to operate independently could provide crucial intelligence about future threats. What are you proposing? Scott asks carefully. Pav. Merle Dixon. Merle lays out his proposal with business-like precision, having thought through every angle during his weeks of observation and planning. I keep ranging, gathering intel, tracking threats. Feed you information about anything that might threaten this place or these people. Maintain my lone wolf cover so nobody suspects we're coordinating. Scott nods slowly, seeing the strategic value despite his obvious reservations about trusting Merle with anything important. In exchange, Scott prompts, you keep my brother safe. Give him purpose, community, reasons to stay put instead of following me into danger. Daryl needs roots I can't provide. The emotional honesty in Merle's voice surprises them both. Family loyalty transcending personal comfort, sacrifice disguised as practical arrangement. And you keep doing whatever it is you do to protect these people, Merle continues. Don't matter if I understand how or why. Results speak for themselves. Pav. Scott. Scott weighs the offer against potential risks. Merle knowing about his supernatural abilities creates vulnerability, but also provides unique advantages. Someone who can operate independently, gather intelligence, and maintain plausible deniability about their connection. He's offering to be my advanced scout, early warning system, intelligence network. And all he wants in return is for me to take care of his brother. That's actually a good deal. All right, Scott decides, but ground rules. No unnecessary violence, no drawing attention to the farm, no compromising the safety of innocents for intelligence gathering. Agreed, Merle nods. I ain't the man I was before this all started. World's got a way of teaching you what really matters. They shake hands in the darkness, sealing an alliance neither would have imagined possible months ago. Pav. Daryl Dixon. The next morning brings news that Daryl expected but dreaded. Merle's leaving again, claiming the farm life doesn't suit his wandering nature. The brothers share a private goodbye that carries weight of understanding rather than argument. You be careful out there, Daryl mutters, embracing his brother roughly. Always am. You keep these people safe, here. They're good folk, worth protecting. Daryl nods, recognizing the blessing hidden in Merle's words. His brother's approval of the farm community matters more than he'd admit aloud. Come back when you can, Daryl says. Always got a place here. I know, baby brother. I know. Pav. Scott. Scott watches Merle's departure from the farmhouse porch, noting the small bundle of papers Merle presses into his hand during their goodbye handshake, maps, locations, intelligence about savior operations that could prove invaluable. He's been working on this for weeks. Not just surviving, but building an intelligence network, tracking threats, preparing to protect us from dangers we don't even know about yet. The partnership feels surreal. Merle Dixon is secret ally and advanced scout. But survival makes strange bedfellows, and Scott's learned to accept help regardless of its unexpected sources. As Merle's motorcycle disappears into George's morning haze, Scott unfolds the hand-drawn maps showing savior outpost locations, patrol routes, and supply lines. Information that could save lives when Negan's inevitable expansion brings conflict to their doorstep. Pav. Andrea. Andrea finds Scott studying the maps later that morning, noting his intense focus and obvious concern about whatever intelligence Merle provided. Bad news, she asks quietly. Complicated news, Scott replies. Threats developing that we'll need to address eventually. But we have advance warning now, which is more than most communities get. She settles beside him, studying the detailed intelligence with growing understanding of its implications. How long do we have? Months, maybe longer. Depends on how fast they expand and whether other communities resist or submit. Andrea nods slowly, processing the reality that their peaceful interlude at the farm is temporary, borrowed time before larger conflicts demand their attention. We'll be ready, she says with quiet certainty. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Scott takes her hand, grateful for the faith she places in their collective ability to survive whatever storms gather on the horizon. With allies like Merle providing intelligence and communities like the farm providing stability, they might actually have a chance against organized threats like the Saviors. For now, that possibility feels like enough. To supporting me in Patreon. Love The Walking Dead, Shelter System. Unlock more chapters and support the story. With exclusive access to 30+ chapters on my Patreon, you get more chapters if you ask for more, in few days plus new fanfic every week. Your support starting at just $6 per month helps me keep crafting the stories you love across epic universes like, in The Witcher with Avatar powers, in the Vikings with Deja Vu system, Stranger Things Demogorgon Tamer. By joining, you're not just getting more chapters, you're helping me bring new worlds, twists, and adventures to life. Every pledge makes a huge difference. Right finger join now at patreon.com/thephanex5 and start reading today. To be continued.